my name is Michael Brenndorfer. So I work as a youth health nurse in West Auckland. And I'm also a nurse educator for school-based health services. So that means that my roles are based around helping young people be happy, healthy, and the most authentic versions of themselves possible, and then supporting other nurses to do the same with the work they do. I'm also a member of the Aotearoa board, and I'm on the board of SAIPANS, which is the Society of Youth Health Professionals in Aotearoa. So what I'm trying to do today is kind of put all that together into one presentation. And kind of on top of that, although I'm, work as a nurse, I might actually better describe myself as an activist with a nursing degree. My pathway to nursing came through years of youth activism. And yesterday when India shared that one slide, which got heaps of attention on Twitter around how young people would much rather learn how to riot as opposed to dispose of rubbish. I felt that was quite autobiographical, having been arrested in New Zealand, in Wellington, for inciting a riot previously. Yeah. I was found not guilty of inciting a riot, but the judge explicitly said that I was guilty of eloquent speaking. So, we will see. Yeah. All right. Is it going on that slide? Oh, there we go. Oh, I think I went too far. It went back for me. And essentially, I really am just trying to be a bit of a stirrer today and make one big point, and that's that actually activism is good, actually, and we should encourage more people to riot or partake in other activism, and in particular that youth activism actually is incredibly helpful for young people, especially in terms of addressing some of the health impacts of climate change. Yeah, and that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about. That's the essence of what I'm going to say. I'm just now going to try and justify why I think we should encourage young people to protest and riot, essentially. So one of the things we already know is that climate change is having negative impacts on people's mental health, and it's impacting young people in particular. Another thing we know from the type of work I do is that positive youth development frameworks are one of the best, most effective interventions for addressing mild to moderate mental health issues for young people. There's a new reimagined version of that specific for New Zealand called Manawa, which I would argue if maps really well on all the benefits young people gain from being involved in climate change activism, and therefore climate change activism is good for mental health. And so as we already know all of this is that climate change is going to have a massive impact on health in general. It's going to have a big impact in terms of all of these things. Severe weather patterns we know also have impacts on mental health. All sorts of environmental and weather-based disasters. There's a wealth of knowledge and evidence to show that negatively impacts mental health. But also just the anxiety and the existential dread of climate anxiety is negatively impacting on young people's health. And we know that already. We have a lot of data that shows, the Youth 2000. Oh, it is in there. The Youth 2000 data, which is some regular ongoing surveys looking at the health status of young people across New Zealand, is showing specifically the most recent one, which came out in 2019, shows a higher level of anxiety and depression that young people are experiencing, alongside young people explicitly stating this is because of climate change and the fear of what they're facing. And as India said yesterday as well, young people today will never have lived in a world where we aren't seeing directly the impacts of climate change in our lives. And that's a very significant driver of that anxiety. And young people are at the highest risk of the impacts of climate change on their health and mental health because of the fact that they've never lived in a world that hasn't seen the direct impacts of climate change. Plus, most of the more negative impacts that will come as climate change advances, they'll be the ones who will be experiencing that for their entire lifespan. So acting on this is really important, which is why we should encourage young people to riot in the streets. We actually have some good frameworks for how to encourage and connect climate change activism up in a positive youth development framework that can then ensure that there is the positive impacts on youth health. So these positive youth development frameworks have been well evidenced to improve youth health outcomes on a wide range of domains, not just in terms of mental health. It also improves, completion of school. There's delay of sexual initiation, a decrease in unintended teenage pregnancy, and there's also a reduction in what most of the research calls antisocial behavior through the implementation of these principles. And in positive youth development frameworks, though, are like a lot of other things. They're international frameworks that have been developed for other communities, other cultural settings that we tend to import into New Zealand without much analysis of whether it actually is culturally appropriate for young people here. And although it's been used for many years in New Zealand, these frameworks, we've actually had a big piece of work done by Aotearoa recently, not to be confused with Aotearoa, I get them confused heaps, Aotearoa, which is the Youth Development Association of New Zealand. They've done a lot of work in actually taking a Te Ao Māori informed reinterpretation of this and coming up with a completely new framework that's real useful for New Zealand. And I don't want to go into it too much. I mean, I do, but I tend to talk too much anyway. And if I go too far into it, then we'll do it later. But I will anyway. But this is kind of like how they've represented the framework. It's meant to kind of hint at a weaving together. The top four like components are kind of like the mana that young people have. And those bottom four components are ways that we can kind of develop how youth development can enhance the mana that young people already possess. And I will kind of go through them as briefly as I can in the next couple minutes. That is all the time I have. But it's basically this concept that young people are not problems to be solved. Like a lot of people will bring a lot of parents will bring their kids to me in my clinic and say, "Can you solve this?" But young people aren't a problem to be solved. Actually, they have resources, they have potential, and that just needs development. And so young people have this mana that this framework kind of identifies that we have to acknowledge, recognize, and that should be the basis of all interventions we do. Youth development frameworks can be used across all areas of youth health. This can be used in diabetes services, by the way, and all across. So just putting that there. Yeah, so these are, this kind of like explains a little bit more about what those different components of mana that young people bring with them, and the strengths that they kind of bring that we can work to develop, which in this framework is Māori Taiohi, which is about like fueling the spark in passions and interests that young people have. So when young people express an interest in addressing climate change, that can be, you can fan the flame, fan the sparks. The whakapapa taiohi is about affirming the whakapapa, acknowledging the history of young people's lived experiences, and that includes the intergenerational understandings, being aware of the way that colonization has impacted on youth today, and supporting them to find where they have their standing. Hononga taioa is around acknowledging that the connections are already there, that young people have connections already with their community, the whenua, the environment. Te Aotearoa is about seeing that big picture that the young person is able to explore that big picture across their kind of like analysis of climate change, as an example. And then how we can develop that is through whanaungatanga, taking the time to build those quality relationships with young people and help connect them up to other people they can have quality relationships with. In the climate change movement, there's a lot of opportunity for that. Manakitanga is about nourishing that collective wellness, ensuring that young people within the climate change movement are being nourished in a healthy and sustainable way. Whai wahi tangi is about cultivating young people as contributors to our society and giving them those opportunities to expand in what they do in our climate change movements. And finally, Mātauranga, trying to take all of those different forms of knowledge that young people bring so that they can make the right decisions on the climate activism that they do, which may not always be rioting. And that's it. That's my justification for encouraging young people to riot.